whoever I rob, if I shoot anybody, and they'll be quick and painless, free them from their bodies. I'm not harming them, because they gone. Why and how did I become this person? Drugs, alcohol, no father, the influences, the rap music, the whole bad boy thing, all of it just conditioned me in the wrong way, and I have never gotten past being murderers.
Tell us about this ammo that's no longer manufactured. This box, this logo. We want to know all about that.
Lead Detective David Quinn let only Channel 2 Action News into the homicide unit to reveal the somewhat uncommon bullet that likely killed 2 homeless men just before Thanksgiving.
We have a particularly evil individual that has shot 2 of our homeless community in Atlanta in less than 3 miles away from each other.
Detectives are hoping these bullets will be the clue that connects them with the killer.
Take a good look at it. Okay.
So, here's the deal. The only thing that was consistent with these 2 crime scenes, the one main thing, was the kind of bullets that were in their bodies. You follow me?
If this gun comes back and they say this is the gun I used, are they gonna accuse me of it?
It is an issue.
The gun y'all found on me today, I bought it illegally because even though I'm a felon, I've always believed in the right to bear arms. All I'm trying to do is get back to this acting thing, make my dreams of being an actor come true, so I can provide some type of life for myself and my kids, and you bad before I die.
He was, in fact, a failed Hollywood actor, and the killings start after his final failure, so his grandiose narcissistic dreams are shattered. Murdering for him was to overcome the rage and upset that he had as a failed actor.
When Hollywood didn't work out for him, the need to have his 15 seconds of fame, I think, does play out in his decision to kill multiple people. Really what he craved wasn't necessarily to be an actor and to develop that craft, but it was really to be notorious.
American people love violence. Every time you turn the television on, murder, drugs, sex, Satanism, darkness is glorified. This is what we glorify. All it's doing is feeding that bloodlust that I've had since I was 10. Basically, I suffer from bloodlust, but I want to do it again. You know what I'm saying?
How many do you think you spent altogether?
1, 2, 3, and I robbed and I shot a lady in Decatur the other night.
The other night?
It's 4. Number 1, I just wanted to kill somebody.
And what was the situation? Who is this person?
It starts with, I'm out, looking for somebody rough. And then I take the money from robbing and put that towards my acting career. I'm still holding on to this dream. The sick part is turning from necessarily being about money to just killing.
When he kills, he realizes that this gives him so much pleasure, he's not interested in acting anymore. This gives him the thrill to replace the feeling of disappointment and rage at this other dream. But this is exciting. This is what he wants to do. It makes him feel big, because grandiosity is an important trait in psychopathy, and the ability to keep feeling powerful is part of narcissism.
My suspicion is that the more disenfranchised he became from his goals to be an actor, the more frustrated he became that he wasn't in control of his life. But instead of taking responsibility for choices he was making that were getting him farther and farther away from that goal, it was easier to be a victim. It's easier to take the perspective of, I've been given a raw deal. He failed to say, okay, what else can I do with my life if acting isn't going to work out? He really gave himself permission to act out. That level of narcissism is really common in psychopaths.
I look over there toward the shopping center, and I see this guy out there. The entranceway of a store that's a bank. I see that he's by himself. I done went into this other place mentally, and my adrenaline's going. I'm outside of myself for a split second. Like, something in me is pushing me. It's like something saying, do it. You know what I'm saying? Finish it. I get about this close to him, and then I do like that, right here. And what does he do that? Just like that. That's what he does. He does this when I'm doing. He does that. At the end or before you pull the trigger? Before. Okay. He does that, and I don't even want to react it all the way, but he was like that, and I do pull the trigger. So where's his body go down? He falls just like that, face down, real fast, just like that. And then I walk up to him like this. I still got my mask up, and then I shoot him in the back of the head, and then I shoot him in the back real fast. As I'm looking at the back of his head, I realize this homeless person.
The context in which he's a star is irrelevant, and so he reenacts the murder with glee. He's enjoying the fantasy of replaying the death, and it's absurd because he's enacting a brutal murder. This isn't stage, and it isn't entertainment, but for him, it is.
I'm outside of myself for a split second.
He said he's outside himself, feeling that something else is pushing him to action. There's not an ownership of his feeling and his volition. So there's a split. There's a world inside his head that's running the show that doesn't comport to reality. That's what I think makes him dangerous.
I walk over to make sure he's dead, and it causes a pool of blood. Once the adrenaline comes down, then the remorse, the guilt, the why the did I just do that? That comes up, then the tears.
I wouldn't call it remorse, because that realization doesn't change his future behavior. He doesn't go turn himself in. The feeling may be genuine, but it's not psychologically integrated into his sense of self.
There's a moment of remorse and guilt. It doesn't mean that psychopaths never feel remorse or never feel guilt. The issue is how brief it is, how shallow it is, and how quickly it's gone.
I just felt remorseful, man. But slowly, it starts to just go away. Okay. To where I just don't feel anything anymore. But I felt like after I did that to him, I'm through it. But something in me will not let me get rid of this gun. I saw him, I was just like, somebody's gonna die. And I was just a little mad and frustrated and just wanted to unleash anger, man. I was like, man, I'm doing this man a favor because human beings, we weren't meant to live like this. And I walk up, man, and I'm just like getting outside of myself while I'm harnessing on cold. And I walk up to him and bam, 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 5 times.
Presley is very much in his own gangster movie. He clearly wants to portray himself as a gangster, but he killed a defenseless person. That doesn't make him powerful, that makes him weak. But in his narcissistic, psychopathic narrative, it makes him all powerful.
Presley represents one of the most alarming kinds of cases of psychopathy. There's no recognition of the value of someone else's life. It's patients like this where you don't usually have a warning when they might be violent. He's scary.
I'm asking myself, what the did I just do? Why am I doing this? Why and how did I become this person? What is wrong with you? I get back to the house, even though I'm feeling remorseful, there's something about the power that this gun holds. I cannot let this gun go. Even though I'm sitting here and I got tears running down my eyes, at the same time I'm sitting here reloading.
I think Presley's giving us a compilation of movies and scenes that he's glorified over his years. I don't think he gave a whole lot of thought to reloading the weapon. I think he enjoyed the power. I think he enjoyed the adrenaline rush. We know with psychopaths that they don't experience the same normal range of emotions, highs or lows, that most of us do. And as a result, they sometimes crave a greater level of intensity to feel anything.
I wake up the next day and all of those feelings of remorse, they just kind of fade away. And it doesn't even come into my memory like most people be haunted. I don't feel the emotions that I'm supposed to feel. Killing a person ain't no different from killing a cockroach.
So, how did you arrive at Mr. Tommy Mims?
So I'm watching American Dad. He's supposed to be like a government person that takes people out, right? And he was just talking about murdering and killing. It's like, we shooting somebody in the head and ordering a pizza. It triggered something in me. Being fed all these negative forces, the media, TV, the rap music, the negative. All these triggers going off in my brain just feed my appetite to rob, feed my appetite to be an outlaw, feed my appetite to just kill.
Most of the science data about it tells us that children who are exposed to violence in pop culture, seeing violence in films or in cartoons, don't turn into violent members of society. What we're seeing in his murders is the playing out of the fantasy life that he's adopted for himself.
His inability to stay grounded and rooted in normal society well predates his observation of these shows and movies. Presley is somebody who was violent at a young age. His mother was scared of him. He had had run-ins with the law. There was a foundation that was broken already.
I load up at night. I'm looking for someone to kill. So I'm walking. I'm out here as a wolf. I'm looking for a prey. So I get to that bridge. Maybe it's somebody down. On him, this is just about killing. I walk by and scope him like he laying this way, and the blanket is right here.
Yeah.
I can see his face.
Oh, you can see his face?
Right. He looked like he was sleeping. I'm premeditating, you know what I'm saying? I just take the gun out, and I had with both hands, I was like, boom, 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 like that. I started walking across the street, and he woke up.
Who woke up?
He woke up. I hear, oh, it was like something in me ain't gonna be satisfied unless I know he's dead. It's almost like some satanic. I want another score to add to my collection.
He's aware that his compulsion to kill is just overwhelming. He's also recognizing that, brutally wounding the guy wasn't enough. If he didn't die, he wouldn't be satisfied. He's really losing control. It's just been 3 days after his last kill. He's not able to contain his desires anymore. In a really grotesque way, it's about extinguishing and annihilating somebody's life.
And I was like, hey man, hey, you all right? I'm trying to see was he dead. He's doing this thing with his mouth like a fish out of water. Now I just put the gun to his head. Boom! I saw that when that went in. I actually saw that open up, and when I saw that, I just left.
He's getting more bold in his need for a killing high. I think he was testing out the limits of what other aspects of murder could give him a high. Would seeing blood give him a high? Would seeing brain matter give him a high? For individuals who experience more sadistic interests, the idea of force or fear, creating pain in their victims, suffering, essentially, is something that is part of their arousal pattern.
This is the third time that he's enacting the moment of death, which means that he gets to explore his fantasies of being an actor in the most grotesque way imaginable, where he relives details of the death, including the really vivid and lurid details of how his victims die.
Describing him gasping and then shooting him again is very dispassionate and matter of fact and very callous. There isn't really an acknowledgement that it's another person, another human being. Anyone could be his victim in the way he thinks about people, which I think makes it even more horrifying.
I'm gonna tell you the truth, man. I'm gonna talk to you like I'm talking to my father that was never there. And I'm glad I can get this off my chest no matter what happens with my life after today. I just feel like this whole world is really ran by killers. To make a long story short, I'm basically raised by the gang members in the neighborhood. I was shooting guns as early as 12 years old. I was doing cocaine, selling drugs as early as 12. Smoking cocaine, marijuana, drinking, all the gang members. This is what I've been conditioned to do my whole life. All the drugs, alcohol, no father, the influence, the rap music, the whole bad boy thing. This country being built on blood, the history of America, just all of this just conditioned me in the wrong way, and I have never gotten past being murderous.
Presley's reality is a little different than his narrative. While he may have grown up in impoverished circumstances, he had a mother that was very involved. His mother moved him to a much more affluent school system so that he would be away from those influences, and by all accounts, he started to get his life in order. So much so that he was actually interviewed as a teenager about his former life in a gang. But Presley is wired differently than many of us, and unfortunately, he enjoyed that high, that thrill, and that power, and that's where we have these series of people that he's killed.
Externalizing all blame is something that psychopaths do. They'll acknowledge their role in the actions, but they really will feel that society is to blame. He views whatever he does as being caused by something outside of his control and beyond him, which means a very good place for him is in prison.
I get off on it, but I'm not harming no women and no children. No. So this is the first woman that I shot.
Well, what happened? Set it up for me. What did it look like? Where was it?
Decatur train station. This was all about robbery. This was all about money. I'm a killer with a conscience. You know what? I did just take 3 of my brother's lives. I'm like, I'm gonna go with the white that they took everything from us in slavery. I'm like, everything been taken from me, so I'm gonna take back. Lo and behold, here comes this white lady walking. She goes down that alley. And in my mind, I'm like, perfect, because she by herself.
Did she see you?
She saw me. When I walked in the alley, she pulls out a little knife. She was like, what do you want? That's when I pulled the gun out. I was like, lay down before I shoot you. And she's like, okay. Then she dropped the knife. I told her, get out on the ground before I shoot you. She listened to me. So I'm like, give me your wallet. She gives me the wallet, and as soon as she gives me the wallet, I just go boom. When I hit her, she falls back, and she just starts screaming, oh my God, 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 oh my God. And then I just heard her start saying, oh my God.
The robbery was an incidental part of his narrative. His goal was to kill again. He broke his own rules and boundaries by killing a woman when he swore that he would never kill a woman or children. Presley became addicted to the power, the control, the ability to decide when and how somebody would die.
I'm not harming no women and no children. No.
In the big picture of his perspective, we see that non sequitur between I'd never hurt women and children to murdering a woman. But I don't think he sees any contradiction in that, because she represents, I think, just now the new class of targets, which just have to be white.
His pleasure comes from annihilating a life. So the question is, why does he get so thrilled when he kills? The contrast between his humdrum, low-feeling life and the moment of killing is very dramatic, and that's what creates addiction.
I put the wallet in this side, and then I just walk off. I'm like, oh man, they shoot. I'm acting now, I'm playing a role. Number 1, number 2 here, rest in peace. Number 3 over there, I'm sorry. But after her, I start to be like, it's got to be over. And I had purpose in my mind that all I was gonna do was start working as an actor.
This really captures the fantasy world that Presley lives in, where he is acknowledging that he's playing a part. He's acting as if it is a film and the camera can just be turned off, the set dismantled, and everybody will just go back about their business, not really recognizing these are real human beings he killed. He's literally in a movie set or on a movie set in his head.
He's starting to feel like he's a superstar. There's the catharsis, and then this cooling off period where you're fantasizing about it, and then the compulsion starts again. There is no doubt in my mind he would have kept killing.
So I get back to the apartment, I open the wine, and I $100 for it was $9.
DeKalb DA Robert James planned to seek the ultimate punishment for the murders, but Presley avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty.
I am not a serial killer. I'm a brother that has some real serious issues and problems, who did some things that I am not proud of.
I don't like saying it, but she was constantly tormenting me. You know what I mean? I went to the crowd and got the answer out. I shouldn't have. Why? I was thinking that. I called my mom. Said, I don't know what the hell to do.
What did you actually tell your mom?
I have a little problem. You know what I mean? I killed my girlfriend in my house. And I said, I have blood on my pants. He said, change them. You know what I mean? What brought this all on? What happened last night? Well, I was drinking, and I did some drugs. Cocaine. How much? Oh, I don't know. 2 or 3 bags or something. It was a pretty rough week. We were out of food, out of money, at each other. And like she was at me ever since after work. And I was like, it. Somehow or another, it popped into my mind to kill her. What happened? I went to the crowd and got the hatchet out. I shouldn't have. Why? I was thinking that. I was like, damn. Actually, I was going to get an axe, but the only thing that was there was a little small hatchet. And that's what I used. God, man. And I came in, and next thing you know, she's like, son of a or something.
And then what did you do?
I was thinking somehow or another, make one quick sweep, you know what I mean? It wound up disastrous.
What was the first part of her body that you hit?
Probably the neck.
He was high on cocaine. He was fairly heavily intoxicated, it appears. And so his impulsivity would have been increased. Yet, when he didn't find an axe, that wasn't the signal to just retract and back away from that plan and use it as a cooling off to just get away from her. He then sees a hatchet, and he gets the bright idea to kill her with the hatchet. So there's still some organization to his thought process, even though he wants to believe and hold on to the idea that the drugs made him do it.
He's very blasé as he's discussing it. You know, he talks about it like, well, I was going to get an axe. That's really what I wanted, but I got a hatchet instead because that's all there was. The way that he laughs about it or shirks about it, I think is very indicative of this grandiosity, but also this lack of remorse and impulsivity. Psychopaths don't think about the long-term consequences, or sometimes even the short-term consequences of their actions. They just act to make their discomfort stop. And in this particular case, he was fed up and acted impulsively.
There's not a lot of depth of thought. I don't think there's anything here to suggest that this was going to bring him some kind of sexual pleasure. I just think he wanted her off his back. There's nothing artful, or there's no cunning involved. There's no careful laying in wait. You know, this was a response, you know, an impulsive response, a moment of murderous rage.
I knew that I heard her, right? And I couldn't change that. What am I supposed to do? Just leave her suffering or something? I don't know, man. It was bad, you know what I mean? Irreversible. She got up and mumbled. Then I thought, oh, you know what I mean? What the, you know? And I was like, I was trying to waste her.
How many times would you say that you heard her?
10 times. 10
times.
At least. She was looking at me and tried to escape to the other end of the couch.
The word escape is interesting. It has some meaning, I think, that is deeper and more relevant. And his concern is that she was escaping, but you don't escape after you've been hit in the neck with an axe or a hatchet to the other end of a couch. That's not an escape.
What we know is that the girlfriend was finally going to leave him, and he was aware of that, and there had been an argument that night. Psychopaths like to stay in control of their situation. They have, in many regards, pretty fragile egos. They don't handle rejection well, and having her leave him is not a reality he likely would have accepted.
Was Jennifer present in the room when you were actually striking Becky with the hatchet?
Yes, she was. She was. She came down the steps and made like a scream or something like that. I don't know what she said, but I knew already it was too late. And I was very pressured because I didn't want her to suffer.
I don't think he was worried about the mother suffering at all. I think this is another opportunity for him to use his glib and superficial charm and to present like he's being helpful. He's the hero. And it's very chilling when we're talking about somebody murdering their girlfriend in front of her daughter.
She started getting upset and crying. I said, stop it. I made her sit in that single seat, right? I used a hatchet like one or two more times, and it was nothing, you know?
So Jennifer was sitting there when you used the hatchet for one or two more times?
I think so. Jennifer was just crying. I didn't know what to do with her. I said, don't make me mad.
Did you hit Jennifer?
I tried to knock her down. I wasn't sure what she was going to do. Like, run out. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew I was doing something wrong. She said, I think I've gotten Mom's blood on me. And I took Jennifer out of there and upstairs.
What did you say to her?
Just be good. Do as I say.
Did you ever tell her you want to kill her?
Jennifer? No. I said, well, maybe I can get away with this, you know.
Maybe you can get away with what?
Like it never happened.
Did you have any sex with Jennifer?
No.
Why do you think that Jennifer would mention that you had sex with her?
Because I'm lying, that's why. No, I'm lying. Yeah, I'm lying. Why lie to you, right? All right, so yeah, I did. I'm sorry. It's kind of embarrassing, that's why I did. I always liked her, you know, she's cute and all.
Did you ever tell her that you might have to kill her or anything of that nature?
No. Oh, yes, I did. I'm sorry, I did. I said, what am I going to do now? You know about it. She goes, oh, no. I said, just kidding, just kidding.
He literally is laughing as he is talking about raping a 14-year-old girl. His narcissism is front and center here. His desire for control and his lack of remorse is astonishing, and also what we see in some psychopaths.
And who could do that? He's not pulling himself back. What he's doing is saying, well, what else can I do? I mean, there is a piece missing from this guy's psyche, that's for sure. There's a lot of very twisted and perverse behavior here, all based on rage.
What we know is that Jennifer convinces him to call his mother because she's in survival mode. And she's using a level of decision-making that is profound.
I called my mom. Said, I don't know what the hell to do.
What did you actually tell your mom?
I killed Becky. I said, you know, I had a rack here, man, I don't know what to do. And then she said that she's gonna have the police come. And I said, well, okay, I agreed. And I said, I have blood on my pants. He said, change them then. You know what I mean? I didn't change them now. I went downstairs and I got Becky's pocketbook and gave that to Jennifer and the car keys. So we're sitting on a porch. And I said, I'm sorry that my life is like this. This is weird. I said, I don't know why this happened like this to me. And I said, Jen, well, what do you think? I'm gonna take that car at about 120 miles an hour and head for Mac Job. She goes, the airbag will save you.
Were you thinking about taking Jennifer with you and committing suicide with her or anything of that nature?
I asked her would she like to go along, kiddingly. She goes, no. She knew I was kidding.
It's clearly outrageous that after subjecting this kid to this horrific whirlwind of violence, that he would be saying like, woe is me, and then invite her to commit suicide with him. I mean, how is she supposed to respond to any of this? I mean, it's preposterous, and he's so selfish and so self-absorbed that he doesn't even grasp the enormity of what's just happened.
We'd like to ask you some questions regarding the disappearance of Dee Dee Rosenthal, which occurred on or about February 22nd through the 27th of 1991 at the Somerset House Apartments in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
I figure it's time that people know the truth, and I know the truth.
When this incident occurred, you were employed by the Somerset House?
Yes, I was. I was the maintenance at the apartments. It must have been like Thursday night. I went with a few friends in Somerset Towers, and we were snorting cocaine, partying pretty heavy, which lasted till 1 o'clock in the morning. For some reason, I took the stairs to the roof, and I went over to the edge of the roof, and I swung down onto the balcony of Dee Dee Rosenthal's apartment.
For what purpose did you enter Miss Rosenthal's apartment?
Basically, I liked her. You know, I thought she was pretty nice, and I knew she lived alone.
So you basically went to see if you could have sex?
I was thinking maybe a sexual encounter. I was lured a little bit by her beauty.
The possibility that surprising someone in their own apartment because you find them attractive would result in a sexual encounter, it's preposterous. And he's pathetic and dangerous because when he's in this mode, he's capable of committing murder. When he gets it in his head and he's high enough, these cuckoo ideas are acted on. I think it does put him in the psychopathic spectrum. He's operating from the framework of like an infant, you know, like a teenager.
I entered the bedroom, and she was laying in bed on her back, and I was flipping on her pure, and that's when she awoke. When she spotted me, she let out a scream. She saw me there in her bedroom, and I figured she knew who I was. And I was sure she was gonna make a lot of noise. So I jumped onto the bed, and I tried to cover her mouth with my hand so she wouldn't scream. She bit my hand. It was a good dig. But she just passed out. She slid from the bed to the floor next to the closet. So I held her nose and her mouth closed, and she stopped breathing. I knew that she had passed away. Maybe if she didn't say anything at all, I probably might have just left. I went to the kitchen and I found $80 exactly in cash in her pocketbook. I took that.
He talks about essentially if she hadn't been attractive, he wouldn't have tried to enter her apartment and wanted to have sex with her. But he also actually says that essentially the reason he suffocated her is because she started screaming. She started protesting, and if she hadn't said anything, he likely would just have left. So I think that willingness to blame the victim like that and to do it in such a matter-of-fact way is some of that callous, cold nature that we see in psychopaths.
I unlocked the door so I could re-enter the apartment later. I waited till 2 or 3 in the morning and went back to the apartment. I wanted to take her from this apartment and hide her somewhere. So I took the fitted sheet off the bed, wrapped her in that, and I put her inside the shopping cart. And I peeked out to the hallway, nobody was around. Took her in a shopping cart, down and out the back door of the apartment complex.
This was a planned attempt to cover his tracks and to avoid getting arrested. And I think what's the most horrific is just the way he discusses it so calmly, as if he's going to the store to buy groceries. Just wrapped her up, put her in a shopping cart. It is egregious, the lack of concern or remorse that he has for her.
Could you describe where you took Miss Rosenthal?
A landfill area of some sort off of Route 130. There was a dirt road that you could drive back there, and the weeds were also 6 foot tall. I took her from the car, maybe 15 or 20 feet into the weeds and left her there.
Somebody gets to do all these things. What were you watching too much TV or what?
Oh, like why would I commit a murder?
Yes, yes.
I had an accident while I was 16 and a half. We were partying with marijuana a little bit. And it was at nighttime. Well, it was an accident. We took off.
You took off from that accident?
Yeah. And then I heard that announcement over the radio.
Yeah?
He said they were looking for somebody who killed somebody's old lady. Automatically, my heart dropped. I thought that the car accident that I had up over there under the bridge,
right,
that I had killed a woman driver.
So you thought of yourself as what?
As a killer.
But to this day, then, obviously, you don't really know what happened, right?
I really don't know. But I understand that if I wanted to again, I can, you know.
It's very possible that that was the birth of this identity as a killer at age 16. Even though he wasn't certain if he was a killer, he latched on to that as a potential identity. And that, again, may have been foreshadowing for what we see happens later on in life. That accident could have opened the doors for him to think that he could kill again, and he did. He demonstrates textbook psychopathic qualities.
On the morning of July 23rd, 2007, the quiet town of Cheshire, Connecticut, awoke to a scene almost impossible to comprehend. Thick smoke drifted into the summer sky above an otherwise peaceful suburban neighborhood. Fire engines, police cruisers, and ambulances crowded the narrow residential street as neighbors stood behind yellow tape, struggling to understand what had happened inside the large colonial-style home at 115 Sorghum Mill Drive. Only hours earlier, it had been an ordinary family residence occupied by four people whose lives reflected stability, achievement, and the comforting rhythm of everyday routines. Now, it had become the center of one of the most devastating home invasion cases in modern American history. One man, injured and covered in soot, had managed to escape. His wife and two daughters would never leave the house alive. Over the next several years, investigators, prosecutors, journalists, and the public would examine every decision made during those 7 hours. Questions would be asked about two repeat offenders who turned a burglary into unimaginable tragedy. Questions would also be asked about law enforcement's response after a desperate plea for help reached a local bank. But before examining those events, it is important to remember what existed before the violence. Before courtrooms, headlines, and public debate, there was simply a family. The story of the Cheshire home invasion murders is remembered not because of the men who committed the crimes, but because of the lives that were forever changed on a single July night. Cheshire was widely regarded as the kind of town where people expected to build their futures. Located in New Haven County, Connecticut, it was known for quiet neighborhoods, well-kept homes, and a strong sense of community. Residents often described it as safe, welcoming, and family-oriented. Violent crime was uncommon enough that many people rarely considered it part of daily life. The Petit family fit naturally into that community. They were respected by neighbors, active in local life, and known not through wealth or public recognition, but through kindness and professional dedication. At the center of the family was Dr. William Petit Jr., a physician specializing in endocrinology. His work demanded precision, patience, and compassion. Colleagues regarded him as a dedicated doctor committed to helping patients living with chronic illnesses. Outside the hospital, however, his identity extended far beyond medicine. He was a husband and father whose greatest pride was his family. Friends described him as thoughtful and hardworking, someone whose professional success never overshadowed his commitment to those closest to him. Alongside William was his wife, Jennifer Hawk Petit. Jennifer worked as a nurse and healthcare administrator, dedicating her own career to caring for others. The medical profession often requires long hours, emotional resilience, and constant responsibility. Yet those who knew Jennifer remembered her warmth as much as her professionalism. Together, William and Jennifer shared not only careers devoted to healthcare, but also a partnership centered on raising their daughters in a supportive and encouraging environment. Their oldest daughter, Haley Petit, was 17 years old. She had recently graduated from high school and stood at the threshold of an exciting new chapter. She had been accepted to Dartmouth College, an accomplishment reflecting years of academic dedication. Like many students preparing to leave home for university, Haley's future appeared filled with opportunity. Family and friends anticipated the coming months with excitement as she prepared to begin college. Her achievements represented years of hard work, and her acceptance into Dartmouth was a moment of celebration not only for herself, but for everyone who loved her. The youngest member of the family was 11-year-old Michaela Petit. Unlike her older sister, whose attention was focused on graduation and college, Michaela was still enjoying childhood. She loved swimming and music, interests that reflected a bright and energetic personality. At 11 years old, the world remained full of possibilities waiting to be explored. The age difference between the sisters meant they occupied different stages of life. Yet they remained part of the same close-knit household built around shared routines, encouragement, and affection. Neighbors remembered the Petit family as approachable and generous. They participated in community activities and maintained positive relationships with those living nearby. Nothing about their lives suggested they would become the focus of national attention. Their home on Sorghum Mill Drive represented exactly what many Americans imagine when they think of suburban security, a place where children grew up, parents returned home after work, and weekends were spent together. It was not a mansion hidden behind gates or an isolated estate surrounded by acres of land. It was simply a family home in a community where people believed they were safe. That sense of normalcy is one of the reasons this case resonated so deeply across the United States. The events that unfolded did not occur in an abandoned building, during organized criminal activity, or under extraordinary circumstances. They occurred inside the home of an ordinary family living an ordinary life. That reality forced countless people to confront an uncomfortable question. If something like this could happen here, could it happen anywhere? On Sunday, July 22, 2007, nothing suggested that history was about to change for the Petit family. The day unfolded much like countless others before it. There were errands to complete, responsibilities to manage, and plans for the week ahead. Jennifer and Michaela visited a local Stop and Shop supermarket during the evening, an everyday task that carried no reason for concern. Shopping for groceries was among the most routine activities imaginable, something repeated by millions of families every day without incident. Yet according to the investigation, it was during that ordinary trip that Joshua Komisarjewski first noticed Jennifer and Michaela. Seeing them at the supermarket parking lot, he followed them as they drove home, identifying their residence as a potential target. Later, he contacted Stephen Hayes, and together they agreed to burglarize the home during the night. At that point, according to their later statements and the evidence presented in court, the objective was theft. The decision to target the Petit residence was made without any personal connection to the family. They were strangers whose home happened to attract the attention of two repeat offenders looking for money. That simple and random selection would ultimately set into motion a chain of events lasting approximately 7 hours, transforming an ordinary suburban address into one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. As darkness settled over Cheshire on the evening of July 22nd, the Petit family prepared for another night in the home where they had built their lives together. Inside those walls were plans for college, careers devoted to caring for others, childhood dreams, and the quiet confidence that tomorrow would arrive like every other day before it. Outside, however, two men were already moving toward a decision that would forever alter the lives of everyone connected to that house. Before sunrise, the safety that the Petit family had always known would be shattered, and the town of Cheshire would become known around the world for a tragedy no one could have imagined. The events that unfolded during the early hours of July 23, 2007, did not begin with violence. They began with a decision made hours earlier by two men whose criminal histories had already established a pattern of burglary, theft, and repeated encounters with the justice system. Their names would soon become permanently linked to one of the most notorious home invasion cases in American history. But before they entered the Petit family's home, both had spent years moving through cycles of crime, incarceration, and release. Understanding who they were is important, not to elevate their stories above those of the victims, but to explain how a crime that initially appeared to be motivated by financial gain escalated into a tragedy that would leave an entire nation searching for answers. The first of the two men was Stephen Hayes, born in 1963. According to the information presented during the investigation and later court proceedings, Hayes had experienced a troubled life marked by substance abuse and repeated criminal behavior. He struggled with alcohol and drug addiction, factors that became part of a long history of instability. His criminal record included burglary, robbery, and other offenses that resulted in multiple periods of imprisonment. By the summer of 2007, Hayes had no stable employment and continued to drift through life without meaningful structure. Rather than separating himself from criminal influences after serving previous sentences, he remained connected to people whose lives revolved around illegal activity. One of those individuals was Joshua Komisarjevsky. Born in 1980, Komisarjevsky was significantly younger than Hayes. According to the available information, he possessed a relatively high intelligence quotient, but had displayed behavioral problems from an early age. Those intellectual abilities did not prevent him from developing an extensive criminal record. Instead, his history reflected repeated involvement in burglaries, thefts, and home break-ins. Investigators later noted that he had considerable experience entering occupied residences, a type of crime that carries inherent risks because homeowners may unexpectedly confront intruders. Despite those dangers, burglary remained a recurring pattern throughout his criminal history. Hayes and Komisarjevsky became acquainted while serving time in prison. Their friendship continued after their release, creating a partnership built not around legitimate employment or rehabilitation, but around shared criminal experience. By July 2007, they were spending time together despite their histories of repeated offenses. Later testimony established that the two men discussed committing burglaries as a way of obtaining money. The Petit residence would become one of those targets, selected not because of any personal dispute or previous relationship, but because of a chance encounter that occurred during an ordinary evening. On July 22nd, Jennifer Petit and her 11-year-old daughter, Michaela, visited a stop-and-shop supermarket to buy groceries. For the Petit family, the trip represented nothing unusual. Families visit supermarkets every day, often without giving the experience a second thought. Yet according to the investigation, Joshua Komisarjevsky noticed Jennifer and Michaela while they were at the store. Observing them, he formed the impression that they belonged to a financially comfortable household. Investigators later reported that he believed the family might possess money or valuable property worth stealing. When Jennifer and Michaela left the supermarket and drove home, Komisarjevsky secretly followed their vehicle. He watched long enough to identify where they lived before leaving the neighborhood. Rather than acting immediately, he returned to meet Stephen Hayes. Together, the two men discussed what they had seen and agreed to return later that night. According to statements presented during the investigation, their original objective was burglary. The decision to target the Petit family was not based on personal knowledge of the people inside the home. William, Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela were complete strangers. The selection was random, the result of opportunity rather than planning directed at specific individuals. That randomness would later become one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. It demonstrated how an ordinary family living an ordinary life could suddenly become victims simply because they crossed paths with two repeat offenders looking for a suitable house. As evening turned into night, Cheshire remained quiet. The residential streets reflected the peaceful atmosphere for which the town had long been known. Inside the Petit home, the family settled into their normal routines. There was no indication that they suspected anyone had followed Jennifer and Michaela home earlier. That evening, there was no reason to believe their house had been selected by strangers. Like countless other families, they prepared for sleep expecting another ordinary Monday morning. At approximately 3 o'clock in the morning on July 23rd, Hayes and Komisarjevsky returned to Sorghum Mill Drive. Under the cover of darkness, they approached the house and discovered that a basement door had been left unlocked. That unlocked entrance provided them with access to the interior without forcing a window or breaking a door, reducing the likelihood of immediately alerting the family. Quietly entering the home, they made their way inside. Their first encounter was with Dr. William Petit Jr., who was sleeping downstairs in the family room. William was attacked with a baseball bat and suffered serious head injuries. Although badly hurt, he remained conscious. The two intruders restrained him using plastic zip ties and duct tape before moving him into the basement. With William incapacitated, they turned their attention to the rest of the household. Jennifer was awakened by the disturbance and confronted by the intruders. She was restrained, and the couple's daughters, Haley and Michaela, were also taken under the offender's control. The family members were separated and confined in different areas of the house, preventing them from communicating with one another. Investigators later reconstructed these early hours through physical evidence, William Petit's testimony, and the statements of the offenders. At this stage, the crime remained a hostage situation driven by financial motives. The intruders searched throughout the residence expecting to find substantial amounts of cash. Instead, they discovered far less money than anticipated. Investigators determined that only a relatively small amount of cash was available inside the house. According to later testimony, this discovery frustrated the offenders. Rather than abandoning the burglary and leaving, they adapted their plan. While searching through personal belongings and financial documents, they learned that Jennifer had access to bank accounts. That discovery shifted the direction of the crime. Instead of taking only the money already inside the house, Hayes and Komisarjevsky decided they would force Jennifer to withdraw additional funds from her bank after daylight. William remained restrained in the basement, suffering from significant injuries and unable to intervene. Jennifer and her daughters remained under the control of the intruders inside the home. The situation had already become extremely dangerous, but the most tragic events had not yet occurred. As the first light of morning slowly approached Cheshire, the offenders believed they still had time to carry out their revised plan. They intended to keep the family alive long enough to obtain more money before leaving. Outside the house, the neighborhood remained largely unaware that anything unusual was taking place. Neighbors slept peacefully, unaware that only a short distance away an entire family had become hostages inside their own home. What had begun as a burglary had already evolved into a prolonged ordeal, and with every passing hour, the opportunities for the victims to regain control of the situation became increasingly limited. The next stage of the crime would move beyond the walls of the Petit residence and into a public place where one courageous act by Jennifer Hawk Petit would set in motion the law enforcement response that later became one of the most intensely debated aspects of the entire case. As dawn broke over Cheshire on the morning of July 23, 2007, the home at 115 Sorghum Mill Drive had already become the scene of a prolonged hostage situation. Hours had passed since Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky entered through the unlocked basement door. Dr. William Petit Jr. remained restrained in the basement after suffering serious injuries during the initial attack. Jennifer Hawk Petit and her two daughters, Haley and Michaela, were being held separately inside the house. The offenders had searched room after room, expecting to find a large amount of cash. But their expectations were not met. Instead of leaving with what little they found, they made a decision that fundamentally changed the course of the crime. According to the investigation, while searching through the family's belongings, the intruders discovered financial information indicating that Jennifer had access to bank accounts and credit. Believing they could obtain more money, they decided to force her to withdraw cash from a local bank. To ensure her compliance, they threatened the lives of her husband and daughters. Jennifer understood that every decision she made could affect the safety of the people she loved. The threats against her family placed her in an impossible position. She was no longer acting only for herself. Every movement outside the house would take place under the knowledge that 3 members of her family remained behind as hostages. During those early morning hours, William Petit was still confined in the basement. Injured and restrained, he had no way of knowing exactly what was happening elsewhere in the house. Investigators later determined that although he remained conscious, his ability to intervene was almost non-existent because of his injuries and the restraints used against him. Jennifer, meanwhile, was preparing to leave the house under the supervision of Stephen Hayes. The plan devised by the offenders depended on her returning with cash. At approximately 9 o'clock that morning, Hayes escorted Jennifer to a nearby Bank of America branch. To anyone observing from a distance, the pair may have appeared to be ordinary customers arriving to conduct routine business. Yet behind that appearance was a hostage situation unfolding only minutes away. Jennifer entered the bank carrying the weight of knowing that her husband and daughters remained under the control of an armed pair of offenders. Every word she spoke and every action she took carried enormous risk. Inside the bank, Jennifer requested a withdrawal of approximately $15,000. During the transaction, one of the bank employees noticed that something seemed wrong. Jennifer's behavior suggested distress despite her efforts to remain composed. According to the investigation, she quietly informed the bank teller that her family was being held hostage and that she had been threatened. It was a brief statement, but one of extraordinary courage. Jennifer had found the first opportunity in several hours to communicate with someone outside the control of the offenders. She chose to use that opportunity despite knowing the potential consequences if her captors discovered what she had done. The bank staff immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. Managers were notified, and emergency services were contacted through a 911 call. Within a short period, law enforcement officers were responding to what they understood to be an active hostage situation involving multiple victims inside a private residence. The information reaching dispatchers was alarming but incomplete. Officers knew that a family was reportedly being held inside their home. They knew one victim had appeared at a bank under duress. Beyond those facts, however, many critical details remained unknown. Investigators and officers responding to the call did not know exactly how many offenders were inside the house. They did not know what weapons were available to the suspects. They could not determine where each hostage was located inside the residence. They also could not know whether the offenders were watching the area outside the house or whether an immediate tactical assault might provoke violence against the hostages. These uncertainties shaped the initial law enforcement response. Police units arrived near the Petit residence and established a perimeter around the property. Rather than immediately entering the home, officers maintained surveillance while attempting to gather additional information about the situation unfolding inside. At the time, they faced a difficult operational problem. Every hostage incident presents competing priorities. Acting too quickly can place hostages in immediate danger if suspects respond violently. Waiting too long can also allow events inside to deteriorate. The officers responding that morning had only fragments of information and were forced to make decisions without seeing what was taking place beyond the walls of the house. Years later, this decision would become one of the most controversial aspects of the case. Family members of the victims and many members of the public argued that earlier intervention might have created an opportunity to save lives. Others pointed out that responding officers lacked essential intelligence regarding the number of suspects, their weapons, and the location of the hostages, making any immediate assault extremely risky. The debate would continue long after the criminal trials concluded, becoming part of the broader legacy of the Cheshire home invasion murders. While police maintained their positions outside, the situation inside the Petit home continued to unfold beyond the view of law enforcement. Jennifer returned to the residence after withdrawing the money. According to the investigation, the offenders now possessed both the cash they had demanded and continued control over the family. Yet obtaining the money did not bring the ordeal to an end. Instead, investigators determined that the violence escalated after Jennifer's return. Evidence presented during the investigation and later at trial established that Jennifer was sexually assaulted before being murdered. The investigation also determined that Michaela was sexually assaulted during the course of the crime. These findings, supported by forensic evidence and testimony presented during court proceedings, demonstrated that the offenders' actions had gone far beyond the financial objective that initially brought them to the Petit residence. The home invasion had transformed into a series of violent crimes whose consequences would permanently devastate an entire family. Throughout this period, William Petit remained restrained in the basement. Although seriously injured, he continued searching for an opportunity to free himself. His injuries made even the smallest movements difficult. Every attempt to loosen the restraints required persistence despite pain and exhaustion. Eventually, William succeeded in partially freeing himself. Rather than remaining inside, he made the decision to crawl out of the basement and leave the house in search of help. The effort demanded extraordinary determination. Injured, disoriented, and weakened by hours of captivity, he managed to reach the outside of the residence. His escape represented the first successful break in the offender's control over the family. William made his way toward neighboring homes, seeking assistance from anyone who could contact emergency responders. According to the investigation, it was around this time that the offenders realized William had escaped. Their awareness that one hostage had broken free dramatically altered the situation inside the house. The sequence of events that followed unfolded rapidly. The remaining members of the Petit family were still inside the residence as the offenders reacted to the changing circumstances. Outside, police officers remained positioned around the property, still working with limited information regarding conditions inside. Within moments, the crisis that had begun as a burglary expanded into a hostage situation and evolved into multiple violent crimes would enter its final and most devastating stage. The decisions made during the next several minutes would leave the house engulfed in flames, claim 3 innocent lives, and forever change the life of the only survivor. Dr. William Petit Jr. The investigation that followed would reconstruct those final moments through physical evidence, forensic examination, witness testimony, and the confessions of the offenders, ensuring that although the Petit family could never be restored, The events of those 7 tragic hours would be documented in extraordinary detail for the pursuit of justice. The final stage of the Cheshire home invasion murders unfolded within a remarkably short period of time, yet its consequences would echo for decades. By the time Dr. William Petit Jr. managed to escape from the basement and seek help, nearly 7 hours had passed since Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjewski first entered the family's home through an unlocked basement door. What had begun during the darkness of the early morning as a planned burglary had evolved into a prolonged hostage crisis, multiple violent crimes, and a situation that law enforcement officers outside the residence were still attempting to fully understand. Inside the house, the remaining members of the Petit family were still under the control of the 2 offenders. Outside, officers had established a perimeter after receiving the emergency call from the Bank of America branch, where Jennifer Hawk Petit had quietly informed a bank employee that her family was being held hostage. The scene had become increasingly tense, with police attempting to gather information while confronting significant uncertainty about what was happening beyond the walls of the home. When William finally succeeded in freeing himself from the restraints that had held him in the basement for hours, his escape required extraordinary determination. Earlier that morning, he had been attacked with a baseball bat and had suffered serious head injuries before being restrained with plastic zip ties and duct tape. Those injuries, combined with the physical exhaustion of hours spent in captivity, made every movement difficult. Nevertheless, he continued trying to loosen the restraints until he was able to crawl out of the basement. Investigators later learned that he did not simply walk away from the house. Injured, weakened, and disoriented, he struggled toward neighboring homes in search of assistance. His escape represented the first successful attempt by any member of the family to break free from the control of the offenders. It also marked a turning point in the sequence of events. According to the investigation, Hayes and Komisarjewski soon realized that William was no longer inside the basement. The disappearance of one hostage meant that someone could alert authorities and that the situation inside the house was rapidly changing. Whatever opportunity the offenders believed they still possessed to leave quietly had disappeared. At this point, investigators concluded that the violence escalated further. Evidence presented during the criminal proceedings established that Jennifer Hawk Petit was murdered after returning from the bank. The investigation also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted before her death. These findings were supported by forensic evidence and became part of the prosecution's case during the subsequent trials. The investigation further established that 11-year-old Michaela Petit had also been sexually assaulted during the course of the crimes. The evidence documenting these offenses reflected the profound cruelty inflicted upon the family during those final hours. Although these facts formed an essential part of the criminal case, prosecutors and later commentators consistently emphasized that the focus should remain on the victims rather than the offender's actions. Jennifer was remembered not because of the violence committed against her, but because she had devoted her career to caring for others and, even while under extraordinary threat, had found the courage to alert bank employees that her family needed help. While these crimes unfolded inside the residence, officers outside remained unaware of the precise sequence of events. They knew that hostages were inside and that suspects remained in the house, but they could not directly observe what was occurring. As later investigations would show, the limited information available to responding officers became central to the debate surrounding their tactical decisions. Before those debates could even begin, however, the tragedy reached its final stage. After William escaped, Hayes and Komisarjewski set fire to the Petit family home. According to investigators, gasoline was poured throughout portions of the residence before the fire was intentionally ignited. The blaze spread rapidly through the house, transforming the hostage situation into a catastrophic fire emergency. Thick smoke quickly filled the interior, reducing visibility and making escape increasingly difficult for anyone still inside. The investigation later determined that Haley Petit attempted to escape. Evidence showed that she had managed to free herself from her restraints and moved into the hallway in an effort to reach safety. Tragically, she did not survive. Investigators concluded that she succumbed before she could escape the burning house. Michaela was later found still restrained in her bedroom. Medical findings determined that both sisters died as a result of smoke inhalation. Their deaths became one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the case, emphasizing how close they had been to freedom while the fire consumed the home around them. Firefighters responded quickly after the blaze erupted, but the conditions inside the residence were already extremely dangerous. Their efforts focused first on controlling the fire and then searching for anyone who might still be alive inside. Once the flames were brought under control, rescue personnel entered the damaged structure. There they discovered Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela. None of them had survived. The home that only hours earlier had been filled with an ordinary family's daily life had been transformed into one of the most devastating crime scenes in Connecticut history. Outside the house, William Petit learned the unimaginable reality that his wife and daughters had not escaped. His own survival stood in painful contrast to the loss of the rest of his family. Even as emergency medical personnel treated his injuries, the scale of the tragedy was becoming apparent to investigators, first responders, and the surrounding community. Meanwhile, Hayes and Komisarski attempted to flee the area using the Petit family's sport utility vehicle. Their escape was brief. Police officers responding to the incident observed the vehicle and initiated a pursuit. The chase lasted only a short distance from the Petit residence before the suspect's vehicle collided with a police car. Following the collision, both men attempted to flee on foot, but were quickly apprehended by officers. Their capture occurred only about a block away from the Petit home. The rapid arrest ensured that investigators immediately had both suspects in custody while the crime scene was still being secured. Officers also recovered property belonging to the Petit family from the suspects, further strengthening the evidentiary chain that prosecutors would later present during trial. With both offenders arrested, investigators shifted their attention toward reconstructing everything that had happened during the previous 7 hours. The burned residence became the focus of an extensive forensic investigation. Specialists documented the fire damage, collected physical evidence, photographed every accessible room, and began piecing together the timeline using witness testimony, surveillance footage, forensic examinations, and later the statements made by both offenders. The destruction caused by the fire created significant challenges for investigators, but it did not erase the evidence necessary to understand what had occurred. Instead, the combination of physical evidence, surveillance recordings, DNA analysis, and William Petit's testimony would ultimately provide prosecutors with a comprehensive account of the crimes. As news of the tragedy spread throughout Connecticut and across the United States, the Cheshire home invasion murders rapidly became a national story. The image of a respected physician surviving while losing his entire family captured public attention. But so too did the extraordinary courage demonstrated by Jennifer Petit at the bank, where her quiet warning to a teller initiated the emergency response despite the grave danger she faced. In the days that followed, grief quickly gave way to demands for answers. How had an apparently random burglary escalated into such devastating violence? Could the outcome have been different? Did law enforcement have enough information to intervene sooner? Or would an earlier assault on the residents have placed the hostages in even greater danger? These questions would dominate public discussion long after the arrests had been made. Before those broader debates could be addressed, however, investigators first needed to establish every fact supported by the evidence. The criminal trials that followed would depend not on speculation or public opinion, but on the careful reconstruction of each step taken by the offenders from the moment they entered the Petit residence until the moment they were arrested only a short distance away. With Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarski in custody only a short distance from the Petit family home, the immediate danger to the community had ended. For investigators, however, the work had only begun. The events of July 23, 2007, had unfolded over approximately 7 hours, involved multiple locations, numerous victims, and a house that had been intentionally set on fire. Establishing an accurate and complete timeline would require careful coordination between local law enforcement, forensic specialists, medical examiners, and prosecutors. Every physical object recovered, every surveillance recording obtained, and every statement collected would become essential in reconstructing exactly what had occurred from the moment the offenders entered the home until their arrest. Although the fire had caused extensive damage to the residence, investigators quickly determined that significant evidence had survived. The burned structure became a carefully controlled crime scene. Specialists documented the condition of every accessible room, photographed damaged areas, and preserved physical evidence before the property could be further disturbed. Fire investigators worked alongside homicide detectives to distinguish destruction caused by the blaze from evidence relating directly to the crimes committed before the fire was started. Their task was not simply to determine how the fire began, but to understand how it fit into the overall sequence of events established by the investigation. One of the earliest and most valuable pieces of evidence came from outside the Petit residence. Bank surveillance cameras recorded Jennifer Hawk Petit entering the Bank of America branch on the morning of July 23rd. The footage confirmed that she withdrew approximately $15,000 while under the supervision of Stephen Hayes. More importantly, it supported witness accounts describing Jennifer's attempt to discreetly alert bank employees that her family was being held hostage. Bank personnel later described recognizing that something was seriously wrong, leading them to notify management and place the emergency call to 911. The surveillance recordings provided investigators with an objective timeline that established Jennifer's movements away from the house and back again. Those recordings became an important component of the prosecution's reconstruction of the day's events because they confirmed both the withdrawal of money and the fact that Jennifer had sought help despite the enormous risks she faced. Another significant source of evidence came from surveillance cameras located at a nearby gas station. Investigators obtained footage showing Stephen Hayes purchasing gasoline before returning to the Petit Résidence. This recording became particularly important because prosecutors argued that it demonstrated preparation for the fire that ultimately destroyed the home. Rather than relying solely on witness testimony, investigators possessed visual documentation placing Hayes at the gas station during the relevant period, combined with physical evidence recovered from the burned residence. The footage helped establish the sequence leading to the intentional ignition of the fire. Surveillance technology, therefore, played a critical role in corroborating other evidence collected during the investigation. While video evidence established movements outside the home, forensic scientists focused on physical evidence recovered from inside the residence. DNA evidence connected both offenders to the crime scene. Although the fire complicated evidence collection, investigators were still able to obtain biological material supporting the prosecution's case. These scientific findings were particularly valuable because DNA evidence is independent of witness memory and provides objective confirmation of physical contact between individuals and locations. In addition to DNA, investigators documented footwear impressions, fingerprints, and numerous physical items recovered from the residence and from the suspects after their arrest. Each individual piece of evidence may have represented only one small part of the overall investigation, but together they formed a comprehensive evidentiary picture. Rather than relying on a single witness or one confession, prosecutors were able to present multiple independent sources that reinforced one another. Investigators also examined property recovered from Hayes and Komisarjevsky following their arrest, because the suspects were apprehended shortly after leaving the Petit residence. Officers were able to recover items belonging to the family. The presence of those possessions further connected the suspects to the burglary and supported the timeline showing that they had left the scene immediately before their capture. The proximity of the arrest to the residence also reduced opportunities for evidence to be lost or destroyed before law enforcement took both men into custody. Perhaps the most important witness in the entire investigation was Dr. William Petit Jr. as the sole surviving member of the family. His testimony provided investigators with the only direct account from inside the house during the early stages of the home invasion. William described being attacked while sleeping downstairs, suffering serious injuries, being restrained, and eventually managing to free himself after hours in captivity. His account helped investigators understand the order in which the offenders gained control of the family, the methods used to restrain the victims, and the circumstances surrounding his escape from the basement. His testimony also provided context for the physical evidence discovered inside the home, allowing investigators to compare his recollections with forensic findings. Wherever possible, detectives sought to corroborate William's statements with independent evidence, a standard investigative practice designed to ensure accuracy. The investigation was further strengthened by statements made by both offenders. During the course of the criminal proceedings, Hayes and Komisarjevsky provided confessions and other statements that investigators compared against the physical evidence already collected. Rather than accepting those statements at face value, detectives evaluated whether individual details matched surveillance footage, forensic findings, witness testimony, and the documented timeline. This process allowed prosecutors to distinguish between information independently supported by evidence and assertions that could not be verified. The consistency between many aspects of the confessions and the physical evidence significantly reinforced the prosecution's case. As investigators assembled the timeline, they demonstrated how numerous independent pieces of evidence converged. Surveillance footage documented Jennifer's visit to the bank and Hayes' purchase of gasoline. DNA evidence placed the offenders at the scene. Physical evidence recovered from the residence matched William Petit's account of the attack and restraint. Property recovered after the suspect's arrests linked them directly to the burglary. The confessions provided additional information that corresponded with forensic findings. Rather than depending on any single category of evidence, the investigation relied upon the cumulative strength of multiple sources that consistently pointed to the same conclusion. This comprehensive approach proved especially important because of the public attention surrounding the case. The extraordinary nature of the crimes meant that investigators understood every aspect of their work would later be examined in court, maintaining an accurate chain of custody, carefully documenting each item of evidence, and ensuring that forensic analyses met established scientific standards were essential to preserving the integrity of the investigation. Prosecutors would ultimately present not only emotional testimony about the loss suffered by the Petit family, but also a methodically assembled body of evidence demonstrating the responsibility of Hayes and Komisarjevsky for every major stage of the crimes. Beyond establishing criminal responsibility, the investigation also became central to the broader public discussion that followed. Because officers had responded to the emergency call while victims were still alive inside the residence, every documented minute of the timeline acquired additional significance. Investigators reconstructed when Jennifer arrived at the bank, when emergency services were notified, when officers established their perimeter, when William escaped, when the fire began, and when the suspects fled. These chronological details became important not only for the criminal prosecutions, but also for later reviews of the law enforcement response. Although the criminal investigation itself focused on proving the offender's guilt, the timeline it produced also informed the continuing debate regarding police tactics during hostage situations. By the time investigators completed their work, the evidence against Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky was extensive and mutually reinforcing. Surveillance recordings, forensic science, witness testimony, physical evidence, and the offender's own statements combined to create one of the strongest prosecutorial cases possible under extraordinarily tragic circumstances. The challenge that remained no longer involved identifying those responsible, Instead, it shifted to the courtroom, where prosecutors would present this carefully constructed body of evidence before separate juries. There, the legal system would determine the fate of the two men whose decisions during 7 devastating hours had forever altered the lives of the Petit family and left an enduring mark on the state of Connecticut. By the time the criminal cases against Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky reached the courtroom, public attention had remained fixed on the Cheshire home invasion murders for years. The crimes committed on July 23, 2007, had already become one of the most discussed criminal cases in Connecticut's history. The surviving evidence was extensive, the identity of the offenders was not in dispute, and the loss suffered by the Petit family had deeply affected communities across the state and far beyond. Yet the American criminal justice system requires more than public certainty. It requires that evidence be presented openly, examined carefully, and evaluated according to the law. The separate trials of Hayes and Komisarjevsky, therefore, became not only legal proceedings but also an opportunity to document, in meticulous detail, the events that had unfolded during those 7 tragic hours. Prosecutors approached the case with a comprehensive body of evidence assembled through months of investigation. Rather than relying on any single witness or confession, they presented surveillance recordings, forensic examinations, DNA evidence, physical evidence recovered from the residence, testimony from investigators, medical findings, and the account of Dr. William Petit Jr., the only surviving member of the family. Together, these materials established a consistent narrative beginning with the decision to target the Petit residence after Jennifer Hawk Petit and Michaela Petit were seen at the supermarket, and ending with the offender's arrest only a short distance from the burning home. Every major stage of the crime was supported by multiple independent sources, creating a case that prosecutors argued left little room for reasonable doubt. Stephen Hayes was tried first. During the proceedings, prosecutors outlined the sequence of events beginning with the burglary, continuing through the prolonged hostage situation, the forced trip to the bank, the crimes committed against the family after Jennifer returned home, the intentional setting of the fire, and the attempted escape that ended with Hayes' arrest. Evidence presented during the trial included surveillance footage showing Jennifer withdrawing approximately $15,000 from the Bank of America branch while under Hayes' supervision. Additional surveillance footage documenting Hayes purchasing gasoline before returning to the Petit residence became another important component of the prosecution's presentation. Combined with forensic findings and testimony from investigators, the evidence demonstrated that the fire had not been accidental, but had been deliberately started during the final stages of the crime. Prosecutors also presented scientific evidence collected from the crime scene, DNA analysis, physical evidence recovered from the residence, and other forensic findings supported the testimony of witnesses and the broader investigative timeline. William Petit testified regarding the attack against him, his restraint in the basement, and his eventual escape despite serious injuries. His testimony provided the jury with the only direct account from a surviving victim and helped connect the physical evidence inside the home with the sequence reconstructed by investigators. The cumulative effect of the evidence left prosecutors arguing that the facts established Hayes' responsibility for numerous serious criminal offenses. After hearing the evidence, the jury found Stephen Hayes guilty on multiple charges, including murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. The convictions reflected the breadth of the criminal conduct established during the investigation. In trial, the legal process then moved into the penalty phase, during which the appropriate sentence would be determined. At that time, Connecticut still permitted capital punishment for certain crimes, and prosecutors sought the death penalty. Ultimately, Hayes received a sentence of death, although the conviction itself resolved his criminal responsibility. The broader legal and public discussion surrounding the case was far from over. Joshua Komisarjevsky was tried separately. Conducting separate trials allowed each defendant's individual actions and legal arguments to be considered independently while relying upon much of the same evidentiary foundation established. During the investigation, prosecutors again presented surveillance footage, forensic evidence, physical evidence, witness testimony, and the detailed investigative timeline. William Petit's testimony remained central to the proceedings, as did the scientific findings documenting what had occurred inside the residence. The prosecution argued that the evidence demonstrated Komisarjevsky's participation throughout the home invasion and the crimes that followed. After reviewing the evidence presented during his separate trial, the jury found Joshua Komisarjevsky guilty on all major charges. Like Hayes, he was initially sentenced to death under Connecticut law. For many observers, the verdicts represented an important legal acknowledgement of the devastating harm inflicted upon Jennifer, Haley, Michaela, and William Petit. Yet even after both juries reached their decisions, the legal story of the case continued to evolve because of developments unrelated to the facts of the crime itself. Several years after the convictions, Connecticut abolished the death penalty. The legal consequences of that legislative change became the subject of further court proceedings concerning individuals who had already received death sentences. According to later decisions by Connecticut's courts, the abolition of capital punishment would apply retroactively. As a result, the death sentences imposed on both Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky were vacated and replaced with sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The change did not affect the underlying convictions. Both men remained guilty of the crimes established during their respective trials. What changed was the form of punishment imposed under Connecticut law. The resentencing reflected developments in the state's legal framework rather than any reconsideration of the evidence establishing criminal responsibility. While the criminal proceedings focused on determining guilt and punishment, another conversation continued outside the courtroom. Almost from the day of the crime, questions had been raised regarding the police response after Jennifer Petit alerted employees at the Bank of America branch that her family was being held hostage. Investigators had already reconstructed a detailed timeline showing that officers responded quickly after the emergency call and established a perimeter around the Petit residence. However, they had not immediately entered the house. That tactical decision became one of the most debated aspects of the entire case. Critics argued that because Jennifer successfully communicated with the bank while the victims were still alive, more immediate intervention might have provided an opportunity to save members of the family. Some members of the public and individuals connected to the victims questioned whether the delay allowed the situation inside the residence to deteriorate beyond recovery. Their concerns reflected the painful reality that emergency responders had reached the area while the hostage situation was still unfolding. Others emphasized the complexity of hostage incidents and the limited information available to responding officers. At the time police established their perimeter, they did not know exactly how many offenders were inside the house, what weapons they possessed, where each hostage was located, or whether the suspects were monitoring activity outside. Tactical decisions during hostage situations often require balancing the danger of immediate intervention against the possibility that a forced entry could trigger violence against those being held captive. Supporters of the officers' response argued that these uncertainties made the situation extraordinarily difficult and that any decision carried significant risks. Importantly, the criminal trials were not designed to determine whether the police response had been tactically correct. Their purpose was to determine the criminal responsibility of Hayes and Komisarjevsky. Nevertheless, the timeline established through the investigation inevitably influenced later discussions concerning law enforcement training, hostage response protocols, and emergency decision-making. The Cheshire home invasion murders became not only a criminal case, but also a subject of continuing professional analysis among law enforcement agencies examining how hostage situations are managed under conditions of incomplete information. Throughout the legal proceedings, one theme consistently remained at the center of the case: the victims. Prosecutors repeatedly emphasized that Jennifer Petit, Haley Petit, and Michaela Petit should be remembered for the lives they lived rather than solely for the violence they endured. Jennifer's courage in quietly informing the bank teller that her family was in danger became one of the defining moments of the case. Haley's academic achievements and plans to attend Dartmouth College reflected a future that would never be realized. Michaela's love of swimming and music represented a childhood brought to an abrupt and heartbreaking end. William Petit, despite surviving the attack, faced the unimaginable reality of rebuilding a life after losing his wife and both daughters in a single morning. As the courtroom proceedings concluded, the legal process had answered many questions concerning guilt and punishment. Yet the broader impact of the Cheshire home invasion murders extended far beyond verdicts and sentences. The case would continue to influence discussions about criminal justice, law enforcement, public safety, and the lasting effects of violent crime. Most importantly, it would inspire efforts to ensure that the names Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela Petit would continue to be remembered not because of the offenders who took their lives, but because of the lives they themselves had lived. When the court proceedings finally came to an end, the legal system had delivered its verdicts, imposed its sentences, and documented the evidence in extraordinary detail. Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky had been convicted of the crimes committed during the home invasion, and although their original death sentences were later converted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole following changes in Connecticut law, no judicial decision could restore what had been lost. For Dr. William Petit, Jr., the conclusion of the criminal trials marked not the end of the story, but the beginning of an entirely different challenge. Learning how to continue living after losing his wife and both daughters in a single morning. Physical injuries heal with time, but the emotional consequences of surviving such an event cannot be measured by medical examinations or court records. William had entered July 23, 2007, as a husband and father living an ordinary suburban life. By the end of that day, he had become the sole surviving member of his immediate family. The road to recovery required months of medical treatment for the injuries he suffered during the attack. Those injuries, sustained when he was assaulted shortly after the offenders entered the home, represented only one part of his recovery. Beyond the physical healing lay the far greater challenge of rebuilding a life without Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela. While the legal proceedings understandably focused on the offenders and the crimes they committed, those who followed the case were repeatedly reminded that the true measure of the tragedy lay not in the punishment imposed, but in the absence left behind. Every family celebration that would never occur, every birthday that would pass, every holiday marked by empty places at the table, and every future milestone that Haley and Michaela would never experience became silent reminders of what violence had taken away.
Jennifer Petit had devoted her professional life to caring for others as both a nurse and
healthcare administrator. During the most terrifying hours of her own life, she demonstrated remarkable courage by quietly informing a bank employee that her family was being held hostage. That brief warning, delivered under extraordinary pressure, reflected the determination of a mother trying to protect the people she loved despite overwhelming danger. Although the outcome was tragically different from what everyone hoped for, her actions remain one of the most courageous moments documented in the entire investigation. Haley Petit was preparing to begin a new chapter after being accepted to Dartmouth College. For many families, the period between high school graduation and college represents a time of anticipation, possibility, and optimism. Haley's academic achievements reflected years of dedication, and those closest to her expected to see her continue building a promising future. Michaela Petit, only 11 years old, represented the innocence and energy of childhood. Her interests in swimming and music illustrated a young girl still discovering the world around her. Remembering Haley and Michaela as individuals rather than simply victims has remained an important part of preserving their legacy. Their names continue to represent lives filled with potential rather than merely the circumstances of their deaths. Determined to ensure that his family's memory would be associated with hope rather than only tragedy, William Petit later established the Petit Family Foundation. According to the information surrounding the case, the foundation was created to honor Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela by supporting education, healthcare, and charitable initiatives. The decision reflected an extraordinary commitment to transforming personal grief into meaningful service for others. Rather than allowing the family's story to end with violence, the foundation sought to continue the values that had shaped their lives before the crimes occurred. Supporting educational opportunities reflected Haley's love of learning. Promoting healthcare echoed the professional dedication shared by both William and Jennifer. Through charitable work, the foundation created opportunities for the family's legacy to be measured not only by loss, but also by positive contributions to communities and individuals in need. Beyond the immediate impact on the Petit family, the Cheshire home invasion murders influenced broader discussions throughout Connecticut and across the United States. One major area of attention involved police training and responses to hostage situations. Because officers had received information indicating that hostages remained alive inside the residence after Jennifer's warning at the bank, questions concerning tactical decision-making continued long after the criminal trials concluded. Some observers argued that earlier intervention might have created an opportunity to rescue members of the family. Others emphasized the uncertainty confronting responding officers, who lacked critical information regarding the number of offenders, the weapons available, and the precise locations of the hostages. The case became an important reference point in discussions concerning crisis management, demonstrating how rapidly circumstances can evolve and how difficult decisions must often be made with incomplete information. Although opinions regarding the police response differed, there was widespread agreement that the tragedy underscored the importance of continually reviewing emergency procedures and training methods. The legal consequences of the case also extended beyond the convictions themselves. Initially, both offenders received death sentences after separate trials. However, Connecticut's later abolition of capital punishment, followed by judicial decisions applying that change retroactively, resulted in both sentences being converted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This development ensured that the Cheshire case remained part of the continuing debate surrounding the death penalty in the United States. For some, the original death sentences represented the appropriate response to crimes of extraordinary brutality. Others viewed the later conversion to life imprisonment as consistent with Connecticut's evolving legal framework. Regardless of differing opinions about capital punishment, the change did not alter the offender's convictions or diminish the established facts of the case. Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky remain imprisoned for the crimes committed against the Petit family. Over time, the Cheshire home invasion murders have also become the subject of study within criminal justice, criminology, and law enforcement education. Investigators, prosecutors, emergency responders, and legal scholars have examined the case from multiple perspectives, including forensic evidence collection, hostage response strategies, courtroom procedure, and the interaction between public expectation and operational decision-making during rapidly developing crises. The extensive evidence preserved during the investigation, including surveillance recordings, forensic examinations, witness testimony, and physical evidence, created a detailed record that continues to inform professional discussions. Yet despite its value as a case study, it is important not to lose sight of the human story behind the legal documents and investigative reports. Every page of evidence ultimately traces back to a family whose ordinary life ended without warning. Perhaps that is why this case continues to resonate nearly 2 decades later. It was not driven by personal revenge, long-standing conflict, or organized criminal activity. According to the evidence presented during the investigation, the Petit family was chosen by chance after Jennifer and Michaela were seen during an ordinary trip to the supermarket. That randomness remains deeply unsettling because it reminds us that violent crime can sometimes emerged from nothing more than opportunity combined with criminal intent. The family's home was not selected because of who they were as individuals. They simply became the target of two repeat offenders searching for a house to burglarize. The devastating consequences that followed transformed an ordinary suburban address into one of the most well-known crime scenes in modern American history. Today, the legacy of the Cheshire home invasion murders is defined not only by the horrific events of July 23, 2007, but also by the enduring memory of Jennifer Hawk Petit, Haley Petit, and Michaela Petit. Their lives continue to be honored through charitable work, educational support, and the efforts of those determined to ensure that compassion outweighs cruelty. William Petit's survival stands as a testament to remarkable resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. While his decision to create the Petit Family Foundation reflects the belief that even after profound tragedy, acts of generosity and service can preserve the memory of those who are gone. The case remains one of the most heartbreaking home invasion crimes in American history, remembered not because of the notoriety of the offenders, but because an ordinary family whose lives were devoted to caring for others became the victims of extraordinary violence. Their story continues to serve as a solemn reminder of the fragility of everyday life, the importance of justice grounded in evidence, and the enduring strength of remembrance. In the end, long after the headlines faded and the courtroom doors closed, what remains most deserving of our attention are not the names of the men who committed these crimes, but the lives of Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela Petit, whose memory continues to inspire compassion, resilience, and the hope that such a tragedy will never be repeated. Years after the events of July 23, 2007, the Cheshire home invasion murders continued to occupy a significant place in discussions about crime, justice, and the responsibilities of communities when confronted with unimaginable violence. The case had already produced convictions, sentences, and extensive legal documentation. Yet the questions it raised reached far beyond the courtroom. It became a story examined not only through the actions of the offenders, but also through the experiences of the victims, the decisions made by emergency responders, and the lasting impact on those left behind. At its center remained a simple and painful truth. A family that had once represented an ordinary example of suburban life had been permanently changed by a crime that began with a decision to steal and ended with the loss of 3 innocent lives. The passage of time did not reduce the significance of what happened inside the Petit home. Instead, it allowed investigators, legal professionals, and the public to examine the case from different perspectives. The details established through evidence showed how quickly a crime can escalate when offenders are willing to abandon any limits on their actions. The initial plan of burglary was transformed into a hostage situation, and the hostage situation eventually became a series of violent crimes that destroyed a family. This progression became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case because it demonstrated how a seemingly conventional property crime could develop into a catastrophe when combined with criminal desperation, poor decision-making, and disregard for human life. The offenders' backgrounds also became a subject of examination. Both Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjewski had histories involving theft, burglary, and other criminal behavior before the Cheshire attack. Their previous encounters with the justice system had not prevented them from committing the crimes that ultimately brought them back into custody. Investigators and legal experts examined their backgrounds as part of the broader discussion about repeat offenders and the challenges faced by criminal justice systems in preventing future violence. However, while their histories provided context, they did not excuse their actions. The evidence presented during the trials demonstrated that the responsibility for the crimes rested with the decisions they made during those critical hours. One of the most significant aspects of the case was the random nature of the victim selection. The Petit family was not targeted because of a personal conflict, financial dispute, or previous relationship with the offenders. According to the investigation, Joshua Komisarjewski noticed Jennifer and Michaela while they were shopping and later followed them home. That brief encounter changed the course of 4 lives forever. The randomness of the attack contributed to the fear and uncertainty felt by many people following the case. If a family in a quiet Connecticut neighborhood could become victims without warning, many wondered what protections existed against such unpredictable acts of violence. This fear was one reason the case received national attention. It challenged the assumption that certain communities or neighborhoods were naturally protected from extreme criminal acts. The Cheshire community itself experienced a profound emotional impact. Residents who had viewed their town as safe and peaceful suddenly found themselves connected to a tragedy that attracted attention from across the country. The neighborhood surrounding Sorghum Mill Drive became associated with a crime scene rather than the ordinary lives that had existed there for years. For many residents, the event created a lasting sense of grief and disbelief. The idea that such violence could occur in a familiar community changed the way many people thought about safety, trust, and awareness. Yet alongside the pain, the community also demonstrated support and compassion. The tragedy brought people together in mourning and in efforts to remember the victims with dignity. As the legal process continued, public attention often focused on the offenders and the punishment they received. However, those closest to the Petit family repeatedly emphasized that the victims should not be defined only by the circumstances of their deaths. Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela each had identities, relationships, achievements, and dreams that existed long before the crime occurred. Jennifer was a healthcare professional whose life reflected service and care for others. Haley was a young woman preparing for college and the opportunities ahead. Michaela was a child whose personality and interests represented a future that was suddenly taken away. Remembering these details became an important part of preserving their humanity in a case that was often dominated by disturbing criminal facts. The creation of the Petit Family Foundation became one of the most meaningful ways the family legacy continued. Through educational, healthcare, and charitable support, the foundation transformed remembrance into action. Rather than allowing the story to remain centered only on violence, the foundation emphasized values associated with the Petit family before the tragedy: compassion, education, and helping others. It became a way to ensure that Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela would continue to have an influence on the world despite the circumstances that ended their lives. The case also contributed to broader conversations about emergency response and law enforcement strategy. The police decision to maintain a perimeter rather than immediately enter the residence remained one of the most debated issues surrounding the tragedy. The criticism focused on the possibility that intervention could have occurred while the victims were still alive. Supporters of the police response emphasized that officers had limited information and faced a dangerous hostage situation where an aggressive entry might have triggered immediate harm to the hostages. This disagreement reflected a larger challenge faced by law enforcement agencies nationwide. Decisions during crises must often be made quickly, under pressure, and without complete knowledge of what is happening inside a building. The Cheshire case did not provide a simple answer to that challenge, but it highlighted the importance of preparation, communication, and continuous evaluation of emergency procedures. In the years following the tragedy, law enforcement agencies continued examining lessons from major hostage situations across the country. Cases like Cheshire demonstrated that every second matters, but also that every decision carries potential consequences. The balance between protecting hostages and avoiding unnecessary danger to them remains one of the most difficult responsibilities in crisis response. The public debate surrounding the case showed how deeply people care about protecting innocent lives, even when the circumstances make perfect solutions impossible. Another lasting aspect of the Cheshire case was its role in discussions about the death penalty. Because both offenders initially received death sentences, their later resentencing after Connecticut abolished capital punishment became part of the larger national conversation regarding punishment for the most serious crimes. Supporters of the original sentences argued that the severity of the crimes justified the highest possible penalty. Others supported the legal changes that remove capital punishment from the state's justice system. Regardless of individual views, the case demonstrated how criminal cases can become connected to broader legal debates that continue long after verdicts are delivered. Ultimately, the lasting significance of the Cheshire Home invasion murders does not come from the notoriety of the offenders. It comes from the lives interrupted and the questions left behind. The case represents the worst consequences of a criminal act that began with a decision to enter a home that did not belong to the offenders and harm people who had never harmed them. It shows the devastating impact of violence not only on victims but also on families, communities, investigators, and everyone affected by the aftermath. Yet it also reveals examples of courage and resilience. Jennifer's attempt to seek help while under threat demonstrated extraordinary bravery. William's survival and later efforts to honor his family demonstrated remarkable strength. The community's support reflected compassion in the face of tragedy. Nearly 2 decades later, the Cheshire Home invasion murders remain one of the most tragic criminal cases in American history. The evidence has been examined, the offenders have been convicted, and the legal process has reached its conclusion. But the emotional impact of the case continues because the story is ultimately about more than a crime. It is about a family whose future was stolen, a community forced to confront unimaginable loss, and the enduring responsibility to remember victims not as names in a case file, but as people who mattered. The most important legacy of the Petit family is not the violence that ended their lives. It is the kindness, dedication, and humanity they represented before that terrible morning. And that is the part of their story that continues to deserve remembrance. The years following the Cheshire Home invasion murders have allowed the case to move beyond the immediate shock of the crime and into a broader examination of its meaning. In the aftermath of such a devastating event, society often searches for explanations. People want to understand how a quiet neighborhood could become the setting for such a tragedy, how a crime motivated by financial gain could escalate so dramatically, and how a family living an ordinary life could be selected as victims without warning. The answers found through the investigation did not make the tragedy easier to accept, but they created a clearer understanding of the choices, circumstances, and failures that combined to produce one of the most painful criminal cases in modern Connecticut history. At the center of that understanding remains the distinction between the people who committed the crime and the people whose lives were destroyed by it. The actions of Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky defined the legal case, but the memory of the Petit family defined the human story. As investigators reconstructed the events of July 23, 2007, they discovered that the crime developed through a series of decisions made by the offenders. The first decision was to commit burglary. The second was to enter an occupied home during the night. The following decisions involved taking control of the family, forcing Jennifer Petit to withdraw money, and continuing the crime even after they had obtained what they originally wanted. Each decision increased the danger and moved the situation further away from the original plan. The investigation demonstrated that the tragedy was not the result of a single moment, but the consequence of a chain of choices made by 2 individuals who repeatedly ignored the lives of the people around them. This understanding became an important part of the prosecution's presentation during the trials. Prosecutors did not portray the crime as an unpredictable accident. Instead, they showed how the evidence revealed a progression from burglary to hostage-taking and ultimately to murder. The surveillance footage, forensic evidence, witness testimony, and statements from the offenders created a timeline showing how the situation changed over the course of the morning. That timeline was critical because it allowed the court and the public to understand not only what happened, but how the crime developed step by step. One of the most important elements of the case was the evidence showing that the Petit family had no connection to their attackers before that night. Jennifer and Michaela had simply gone shopping. Their encounter with Komisarjevsky at the supermarket was an ordinary moment that became significant, only because of the decision he made afterward. The family had not invited danger into their lives. They had not created a conflict with the offenders. They became victims because they were perceived as an opportunity by people looking for someone to target. This aspect of the case created a deep sense of vulnerability among many who followed it. The idea that a routine activity could lead to such devastating consequences challenged the belief that safety could always be guaranteed through careful choices. For Dr. William Petit Jr., the aftermath involved the impossible task of continuing life while carrying the memory of everything that had been taken away. Unlike many survivors of violent crimes, William was not returning to a life where loved ones could provide support and comfort. The people who would normally have stood beside him through recovery were the very people he had lost. His physical survival came with a profound emotional burden. Yet in the years afterward, William chose to focus on honoring his family rather than allowing the crime alone to define their story. His public efforts reflected a desire to ensure that Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela would be remembered for who they were, not simply for how they died. Through the Petit Family Foundation, the family's legacy became connected to helping others. The foundation represented a transformation of grief into action. It reflected the belief that the best way to honor lives lost too soon was to continue supporting values that had been important to the family. Education, healthcare, and charitable assistance became ways to create positive outcomes from a tragedy that had created so much suffering. This effort also influenced how the public remembered the case. Instead of allowing the story to remain focused only on the offenders, the foundation helped redirect attention toward the victims and the contributions they could continue to make through acts of kindness. The Cheshire case also influenced how communities think about home safety and awareness. Although no precaution can completely eliminate the possibility of violent crime, the case reminded many people that unexpected dangers can exist even in places considered secure. The tragedy led to conversations about neighborhood awareness, communication during emergencies, and the importance of recognizing warning signs when unusual situations occur. However, it also reinforced the importance of avoiding fear-driven conclusions. The purpose of remembering cases like Cheshire is not to create constant anxiety, but to learn from them and strengthen systems designed to protect people. Within law enforcement communities, the case remains significant because of the challenges involved in responding to an active hostage situation. Officers arriving at the Petit residence faced a situation where information was incomplete and the stakes were extremely high. They knew that victims were inside, but they did not know the exact circumstances unfolding behind closed doors. The later criticism and defense of the police response reflected a fundamental difficulty in crisis management. Decisions must often be made before all facts are available. The debate surrounding the response became part of the case's broader legacy because it demonstrated how every action and every delay can be examined after a tragedy occurs. For emergency responders, the case reinforced the need for preparation, coordination, and continuous improvement. It highlighted the importance of gathering intelligence quickly, communicating effectively, and understanding the complex risks involved in hostage situations. While the debate about specific decisions continued, the larger lesson was that responding to unpredictable violence requires both courage and careful judgment. The criminal justice system also continued to examine the case through the lens of punishment and accountability. The convictions of Hayes and Komisarjevsky established their responsibility for the crimes. Their later resentencing, due to Connecticut's abolition of capital punishment, demonstrated how legal systems can change even after the most serious convictions have been issued. This aspect of the case reflected a broader national conversation about justice, punishment, and the purpose of criminal sentencing. Supporters of the death penalty argued that crimes of such severity justified the ultimate punishment. While opponents believed the state's decision to abolish capital punishment represented a necessary change in legal principles. Although those debates continued, the facts of the Cheshire case remained unchanged. The evidence established what happened, and the convictions confirmed who was responsible. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of the Cheshire home invasion murders is that there was no opportunity for recovery in the traditional sense. Justice could hold offenders accountable, but it could not return Jennifer, Haley, or Michaela to their family. Court proceedings could document the truth, but they could not restore the future that had been lost. Communities could offer support, but they could not remove the pain experienced by those closest to the victims. This reality is what makes the case remain so powerful years later. It represents not only a criminal investigation, but also a reminder of the irreversible consequences of violence. Yet within that tragedy, the story of the Petit family also contains examples of courage and resilience. Jennifer's attempt to seek help demonstrated remarkable bravery during a moment of extreme danger. William's determination to survive and later honor his family showed extraordinary strength. The community's response reflected compassion and solidarity. These elements became just as important to the legacy of the case as the crimes themselves. The Cheshire home invasion murders will always be remembered as one of the most devastating home invasion cases in American history. But the lasting significance of the story should not belong to the offenders. Their actions brought destruction, but they should not define the people they harmed. The true legacy belongs to Jennifer Hawk Petit, Haley Petit, and Michaela Petit, their lives, their relationships, their dreams, and the positive influence they continue to have through the people who remember them, long after the investigation ended and the courtroom proceedings concluded. The most important lesson from Cheshire remains clear. Behind every criminal case are real people whose lives have meaning far beyond the tragedy that brought them into public attention. The responsibility of remembrance is to ensure that those lives are never reduced to the details of what happened to them, but are always honored for the people they were. The story of the Cheshire home invasion murders is ultimately a story about the consequences of choices. The investigation, the trials, and the public discussions that followed all returned to the same fundamental question: how could a series of decisions made in a matter of hours lead to the destruction of an entire family? The answer lies not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of actions taken by Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky from the beginning of the crime until their arrest. Each decision pushed the situation further into violence, transforming what may have begun as an intended burglary into one of the most devastating criminal cases in Connecticut history. Understanding that progression is essential because it reveals the human cost behind every stage of the crime. On the night before the attack, the Petit family was living a life that appeared ordinary. They were a family with professional responsibilities, educational goals, personal interests, and connections within their community. Jennifer Hawk Petit and her daughter Michaela had gone to the supermarket, an everyday activity that would become the starting point of a chain of events that changed everything. There was no warning that this routine moment would later be connected to a violent crime. There was no conflict, no relationship between the family and the offenders, and no reason for them to believe they were in danger. This randomness became one of the most unsettling elements of the case. The offenders did not choose their victims because of something the family had done. They chose them because they believed the home represented an opportunity. That simple decision created consequences that could never be undone. As the investigation revealed, Joshua Komisarjevsky and Stephen Hayes had previous criminal histories involving theft and other offenses. Their familiarity with crime and with each other formed part of the background investigators examined after the attack. However, their previous records alone did not explain the events of July 23, 2007. What mattered most were the decisions they made during those hours inside the Petit residence. Criminal history provided context, but it was their actions during the invasion that established their responsibility. The evidence showed that the offenders entered the home expecting to commit a burglary. Yet after discovering that the amount of cash available was not what they expected, they did not leave. Instead, they escalated the situation by taking control of the family and attempting to obtain money through threats and intimidation. This was a critical turning point. A property crime became a crime against people. The family members inside the home were no longer simply witnesses to a burglary. They became hostages whose lives were placed under the control of the offenders. Jennifer Hochbetie's actions during the morning represented one of the clearest examples of courage in the entire case. Under extreme pressure, she was forced to accompany Hayes to the bank and withdraw money. To outside observers, the act of entering a bank and completing a financial transaction might appear ordinary. But Jennifer was carrying the knowledge that her husband and daughters remained inside the home. She understood that any mistake could endanger them. Despite this danger, she found a way to communicate with someone outside the situation. Her decision to quietly inform a bank employee that her family was being held hostage became the critical moment that brought law enforcement into the case. That action reflected extraordinary awareness and bravery. It also demonstrated the difficult reality faced by victims in hostage situations. Sometimes survival depends on finding even the smallest opportunity to seek help. After the emergency call was made, police responded to the Petit residence. The officers arriving at the scene faced a situation filled with uncertainty. They knew that a family was reportedly being held hostage, but they did not know the exact number of offenders, the location of the victims inside the house, or the level of danger awaiting them. Their response became one of the most debated parts of the case. Years later, the discussion continued because of the painful reality that victims were still alive when authorities first received information about the situation. Some believed that immediate entry might have changed the outcome. Others argued that entering without sufficient information could have placed the hostages at even greater risk. The debate demonstrated one of the hardest challenges in emergency response, making decisions where every available option carries potential danger. The purpose of examining such situations is not simply to assign blame after tragedy occurs, but to understand how future responses can be improved. Inside the house, however, events continued moving toward a devastating conclusion. The offender's actions became increasingly violent, and the investigation later established that Jennifer and Michaela were subjected to additional crimes before their deaths. The intentional fire that followed destroyed much of the residence and ended any possibility of escape for the remaining victims. Haley's attempt to reach safety demonstrated that, even in the final moments, survival remained possible in her mind. The evidence showing that she had freed herself from restraints and moved toward an exit represented one of the most painful details of the entire case. Michaela was discovered still restrained in her bedroom. Both sisters died because of the smoke from the fire. Their deaths represented the final and most devastating consequence of the offender's decisions. Meanwhile, William Petit managed to escape. His survival was not the result of outside rescue, but of his own determination to free himself. Despite serious injuries and prolonged captivity, his escape allowed authorities to receive information directly from a surviving victim and confirmed the seriousness of what was happening inside the home. Yet survival brought with it an unimaginable burden. William escaped physically, but he emerged into a reality where his wife and daughters were gone. The arrest of Hayes and Komisarjevsky soon followed. Their attempt to leave the area in the Petit family's vehicle ended quickly when they were stopped by police. Their capture meant that the investigation could move from emergency response to evidence collection and legal proceedings. The subsequent investigation would reveal the full scope of the crimes through surveillance footage, DNA evidence, forensic analysis, physical evidence, and testimony. The strength of the case came from the way these different sources supported one another. No single piece of evidence carried the entire burden. Instead, investigators created a complete picture by connecting every available fact. This approach became especially important because of the emotional weight surrounding the case. The public wanted answers, but the justice system required proof. Through careful investigation, prosecutors were able to present that proof in court. Yet even the most complete investigation and the strongest conviction could not repair the damage caused to the Petit family. Justice provided accountability, but it could not provide restoration. The courtroom could establish the truth, but it could not return the years, experiences, and memories that had been stolen. This distinction is important because it explains why the case continues to affect people long after the legal process ended. The Cheshire home invasion murders are remembered not only because of the crimes committed, but because of the lives interrupted. Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela were not simply victims in an investigation file. They were a mother and two daughters with relationships, personalities, hopes, and futures. Their absence continues to represent the true cost of the crime. In the years after the tragedy, the focus of remembrance shifted toward honoring those lives. Through charitable efforts and community support, the Petit family's legacy became associated with helping others rather than only with the violence that took them away. That transformation remains one of the most meaningful parts of the story. While the offender's actions created devastation, the response from survivors and supporters demonstrated resilience. The case serves as a reminder that while crime can create lasting pain, the memory of victims can also inspire compassion, generosity, and positive change. The Cheshire home invasion murders remain one of the most tragic examples of how quickly ordinary life can be destroyed by criminal actions. But the final chapter of the story is not defined by the offenders or by the violence they committed. It is defined by the lives that came before the tragedy and by the efforts made afterward to preserve their memory. The names Jennifer Hawk Petit, Haley Petit, and Michaela Petit continue to represent more than a crime scene or a court case. They represent the importance of remembering victims as complete human beings whose lives mattered, and whose legacy continues beyond the moment of tragedy. The Cheshire home invasion murders remain one of the most devastating criminal cases in modern American history, not only because of the violence that occurred inside the Petit family home, but because of the lasting questions and emotions that followed. More than a decade after the events of July 23, 2007, the case continues to be remembered as a tragedy that affected not only one family, but an entire community and everyone who followed the investigation. The legal process reached its conclusion, the offenders were convicted, and the evidence established the truth of what happened. Yet the impact of the crime could never be measured only through verdicts or sentences. The deepest consequences existed in the lives, changed forever, and in the memory of those who were lost. At the heart of this story were four people whose lives were defined by much more than the tragedy that surrounded them. Dr. William Petit Jr. Jennifer Hawk Petit, Haley Petit, and Michaela Petit were a family with ordinary routines, professional commitments, personal interests, and dreams for the future. Before July 23, 2007, their home in Cheshire represented a place of security and family life. It was where they spent time together, where they built memories, and where they expected to be safe. The transformation of that home into the scene of a violent crime became one of the most painful aspects of the case. A place associated with comfort became permanently connected with loss. Jennifer Hawk Petit's final actions became one of the strongest examples of courage documented. During the investigation, faced with an impossible situation, she found a way to communicate with someone outside the control of her captors. Her decision to alert a bank employee that her family was being held hostage created the opportunity for authorities to respond. Although the outcome was tragically different from what anyone hoped, her action demonstrated awareness, courage, and determination. She was not simply a victim in the investigation. She was a person who attempted to protect her family during the most frightening moment of her life. Haley Petit was remembered as a talented young woman preparing to begin her college education at Dartmouth. At 17 years old, she represented a future filled with possibilities. Like many young people at that stage of life, she was standing at the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with opportunities, experiences, and personal growth. The loss of that future became one of the most painful reminders of the tragedy. Michaela Petit, only 11 years old, represented the innocence of childhood and the promise of everything still ahead. Her interests in swimming and music reflected the personality of a young girl continuing to discover the world around her. Her death, like Haley's, represented not only the loss of a life, but the loss of an entire future that would never happen. Remembering both sisters as individuals remains essential because their lives were far greater than the circumstances of their deaths. The story of the Cheshire Home invasion murders also demonstrates the importance of evidence-based justice. From the beginning, investigators faced the difficult task of reconstructing a crime that had taken place inside a damaged residence and involved multiple stages. However, through careful investigation, they assembled a detailed picture of events. Surveillance footage from the bank documented Jennifer's attempt to obtain money while signaling that she needed help. Video evidence from a gas station connected Hayes to the purchase of gasoline before the fire. DNA analysis, physical evidence, witness testimony, and the account of William Petit all contributed to the prosecution's case. These pieces of evidence did not exist separately. Together, they created a consistent timeline that allowed the justice system to establish responsibility beyond reasonable doubt. The trials of Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky represented the formal process through which accountability was determined. Both men were convicted of the crimes committed against the Petit family. Their original death sentences reflected the severity with which the courts viewed the offenses. Later, after Connecticut abolished capital punishment and legal decisions applied that changed to existing death sentences, both sentences were converted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The change in punishment did not alter the facts established during the trials. The convictions remained, and the responsibility of the offenders for the crimes remained legally recognized. Beyond the courtroom, however, the case continued to raise difficult discussions about law enforcement response. The decision by police to establish a perimeter rather than immediately enter the residence became one of the most debated elements of the tragedy. The criticism came from those who believed earlier intervention might have saved lives. Others argued that officers were operating under extreme uncertainty and had to consider the possibility that an immediate entry could have created even greater danger for the hostages. This debate reflected a reality faced by emergency responders around the world. Decisions during crises are often made without complete information, and every available option may carry serious risks. The importance of the discussion lies not only in judging past actions, but in improving future responses. The case encouraged continued examination of hostage response procedures, communication methods, and the challenges of managing rapidly changing emergencies. It became an example studied by those seeking to understand how law enforcement can balance speed, safety, and careful decision-making in life-threatening situations. The Cheshire tragedy also influenced conversations about repeat offenders and the criminal justice system. Both offenders had previous criminal histories, including theft-related offenses, before committing the crimes that brought them back into custody. Their backgrounds led to broader questions about rehabilitation, supervision, and the difficulty of preventing future violence by individuals who have previously committed crimes. These discussions did not change the outcome of the Petit case, but they became part of the larger examination of how societies respond to criminal behavior and how systems attempt to protect communities. Despite the attention given to the offenders, the most important part of the legacy of the case remains the victims. The danger of highly publicized crimes is that the individuals harmed can sometimes become overshadowed by the people who committed the offenses. In the Cheshire case, efforts have continued to ensure that Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela are remembered for their lives rather than only for the tragedy. Their names are associated with kindness, dedication, education, healthcare, and community service. The Petit Family Foundation became one of the strongest examples of this effort. Through support for education, healthcare initiatives, and charitable causes, the foundation transformed remembrance into action. It allowed the values represented by the family to continue influencing others. The existence of the foundation demonstrates that while violence can end lives, it cannot erase the impact those lives had on others. The story of William Petit also became a story of survival and resilience. Surviving a crime of such magnitude created challenges that no person should have to face. Yet in the years afterward, he chose to honor his family by focusing on positive contributions rather than allowing the tragedy alone to define him. His efforts reflected a determination to preserve the memory of his wife and daughters while continuing forward despite unimaginable loss. The Cheshire Home invasion murders will always remain a painful reminder of the consequences of violent crime. They reveal how quickly ordinary life can be destroyed and how deeply one criminal act can affect families and communities. But the final meaning of the case should not belong to the offenders. Their actions created suffering, but they do not represent the complete story. The complete story belongs to the people whose lives existed before the tragedy and whose memory continues afterward. Jennifer Hawk Petit, Haley Petit, and Michaela Petit are remembered not because of the crime that took them away, but because of the people they were. Their lives continue to matter because they represented love, family, compassion, and potential. In the end, the most important lesson from Cheshire is not simply about crime or punishment. It is about remembrance. It is about recognizing that behind every case file are real people with hopes, relationships, and futures. Justice can hold offenders accountable, investigations can reveal the truth, and courts can deliver verdicts. But memory is what ensures that victims are never reduced to the worst moment of their lives. The tragedy that occurred on Sorghum Mill Drive changed countless lives forever. But the legacy that remains is one of resilience, compassion, and the enduring importance of honoring those who were lost.